MelVee Broadcasting Network, a divine voice out of Africa. Remember to like, to subscribe, and to click the bell. Greetings and welcome to this prophecy alert message entitled, The Birth Pains Have Begun, based on Matthew 24, verse 7 and 8. Have you ever noticed that the world seems to be shaking on every front at the same time for various reasons? Wars are increasing, nations are becoming polarized, millions are fleeing their homes, and food insecurity is growing and poverty is on the rise. And we see earthquakes continuing to strike in different places around the globe. And many people are asking, is the world falling apart? Jesus answered this question more than 2,000 years ago. And in one of his most prolific and very important prophetic statements that Jesus ever made in the Bible, he declared that for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in different places. And then he says this statement, all these are the beginnings of sorrows. In other versions, it's the beginning of birth pains. Notice carefully that Jesus did not say these events were the end in themselves. He said they were the beginning of birth pains. So let's review about 5 key questions that I would like to ask from this scripture and then answer those questions. Have the birth pains begun? The first question I would like us to address today is, what did Jesus mean by the beginning of birth pains? Now, Jesus was deliberate in choosing this imagery of childbirth. Every mother who has ever gone through childbirth, I don't need to teach you this. You understand this principle much more than I do. And to fathers out there, I'm sorry, this is not our lived experience. Let's learn from the mothers who have gone through it. I will give you a detailed biological explanation later on of the birth pains, and I will explain their prophetic applications. But for now, I want you to know that the first contractions, they announce that birth is approaching. And so the contractions begin relatively mildly. They become more frequent and more intense. And eventually it is these labor pains that culminate in the birth of a baby boy or a baby girl. So Jesus was teaching that when you see wars, when you see famines, when you see earthquakes and pestilences and social unrest and global instability, they are not the end in themselves, these things. They are prophetic contractions that are telling you the birth is coming. They are heaven's announcements that history is moving towards a climatic event, which is the second coming of Jesus as we know it in the Bible, as well as the establishment of God's eternal kingdom here on earth. So the issue is not merely that disasters have existed, wars have always existed, earthquakes have always been recorded and they have been there before, and famines, we've always had them in the history of humanity. The issue is the increasing frequency, the intensity, the interconnectedness of the previous and this one, and the impact these events are having on earth. That's what is very important, especially as we approach the final moments. So the question then is, are we seeing these birth pains today in our time? The answer is definitely a big yes. Consider the displacement of populations alone. We have over 123 million people that have been forcibly displaced worldwide. This means approximately 1 in every 67 people are displaced in this world. And so the number nearly doubles when they look at it in the last decade. They are now giving us figures that are showing that over 41.6 million people live as refugees in this world. And that 68.7 million are internally displaced people within their communities or countries. And 9 million of them are actually asylum seekers. This is according to the United Nations Refugee Council or agency. So conflict, violence, persecution, political instability, and economic collapse in the countries in Africa continue to drive human migration at a scale that has never been seen in modern history. And this goes beyond Africa. The world is experiencing the largest displacement crisis in recorded history. And Jesus says this would happen as the beginning of birth pains of his kingdom come. When he says, pray that thy kingdom come. So Jesus says, in the signs and the birth pains, nations shall rise against nation. What does that really mean? The word that's used there for nations, those who study languages, they say in the original text, it means ethnos. It is a word from which we derive the word ethnicity, your ethnicity, the tribe you come from. So Jesus was describing more than wars between governments. He was describing ethnic tensions, tribal conflicts, cultural hostilities. In fact, we also have a name for it. We call it xenophobia and social fragmentation. The other name I recently studied is alien epistemology. So when you look around the world, look at the conflict in Sudan, look at the ethnic violence in various regions within Africa, including South Africa, the anti-migration movements in South Africa, in Europe, in America, the border crisis in the northern continent of America, religious conflicts that we see in the Middle East, the growing nationalism around the world, people rallying around their nations and their flags. When you look at all the mass migration that is creating this tremendous political, economic, cultural pressure and conflict, the problem is not the migration, it's not the science. It is the heart of men that is driven by fear when these things happen. That's the big challenge. So the fear, the prejudice, the suspicion, and even the competition over resources. Jesus says men's hearts shall fail them for fear when they look at things that are happening around the world. So Jesus warned that these tensions would increase before his coming because the human heart is in fear. So can these wars, famines, and earthquakes that are increasing be a sign of anything? The statistics are very sobering when you look at the rise of these issues. Let's just maybe start with wars. Researchers have actually presented data that says in 2024 alone, a total of 61 active state-based armed conflicts were reported. 61. And they said this is the highest number recorded since modern records began in 1946. And that nearly 160,000 people die in organized violence during the same period that they are recording, and that in 2025, interstate conflict reached their highest level since World War II. And that over the last 50 years, the world has moved from a handful of major wars to dozens of simultaneous armed conflict that's occurring across multiple continents. And that the four most continent-ridden years have been, since the data was collected in 1946, occurred between 2019 and currently. Let's also look at hunger and famine as a sign, because according to the global report on food crises from the World Food Programme, they say more than 295 million people experienced acute hunger in 2024. This was reported as the highest level ever recorded in the report's history. And that conflict remains the leading cause of famine. And that famine is created when there's conflict. So when you look at Sudan, Gaza, in Yemen, and parts of the Horn of Africa, millions face severe food insecurity because of war, which destroys food systems, destroys economies, and displaces communities. So hundreds of millions continue to live in extreme poverty, despite unprecedented technological advancement and a humanitarian program with billions of dollars of funding. So while humanity has more knowledge than ever before, we still see inequality, instability, and suffering remaining widespread, if not growing out of proportion in parts of the world. This is exactly what we would expect in a world that's groaning under the weight of sin. The other sign Jesus gives is earthquakes. And I concur with the view from the seismologists that says we should not sensationalize these reports. There's caution that improved technology allows us to detect many more earthquakes today than perhaps we could have done in generations past. Fair point and a fair argument. However, the world still experiences approximately 15 to 20 major earthquakes, which means they are magnitude 7 and higher on the Richter scale. And every year, the destructive nature of earthquakes continues to impact millions of people globally on a compounded scale. Jesus did not say earthquakes would necessarily become larger. He said they would characterize the age that precedes his return. So the measuring of these things and the impact they are having clearly tells us he is about to come. So why did Jesus call these birth pains and not death pains? This is the most important question, because birth pains are painful, but they are not the signs of death. They are signs that something new is about to be born. A life is about to be delivered. So for the believer, the increasing turmoil of the world is not evidence that God has abandoned humanity. It is evidence that history is moving towards its appointed climax, which is the birth of the kingdom of God. Paul talks about this as well in Romans chapter 8, where he says that the whole creation groans in pains of childbirth. The earth is not dying aimlessly. The earth is groaning towards redemption. Jesus is coming. The resurrection is coming. The restoration of all things is coming. The kingdom of God is coming. The birth pains are proclaiming it, they are intensifying, and they are continuing. So, as I mentioned earlier to you, let me take this moment to dive deeper into the sound understanding of birth pains from a medical point of view so that we can apply this prophetically to Matthew chapter 24, verse 8. And I believe this is the most powerful statement of Jesus. He must have understood gynecology and obstetrics in a level that's on another level, and he intentionally chose one of the most vivid processes in human experiences. So what are child pains or childbirth pains? These are uterine contractions, or the walls of the uterus. When they contract, it occurs as the mother's body prepares to deliver the pregnancy. These contractions are not random. They just don't occur. They serve a specific purpose, which is to gradually open or dilate the cervix, and also to move the child downward toward the birth canal. So these pains prepare both the mother and the baby for delivery. The child doesn't choose this, the mother doesn't choose it, nature does. So they culminate in the birth of a new life. The pain itself is not the goal, but birth is the goal. So this is important because Jesus did not say the world is experiencing death pains. He said the world will experience birth pains. So as the push is happening and nature is taking its course, the child and the mother follow the progression of this labor process. So the early labor, which is what we call the latent phase, it is often the longest phase. And what happens in this longest phase? The cervix begins to soften and to open up. And as contractions begin, they are usually mild and often irregular, and they are manageable. And they are far apart such that a mother could actually go and forget about what's happening. She may even be able to leave and not even notice that the contractions mean labor has started. But contractions also begin to occur between 15 and 30 minutes, sometimes lasting 30 to 45 seconds. And in this phase, many women can still walk, can talk, can eat, and can carry on with their normal activities. The mother obviously feels a little bit of discomfort. It begins to be there. There's a bit of anxiety, and there's an anticipation of the increase of this labor. And energy is still relatively high, so daily life continues, but there is some interruption that's happening somewhere. And the baby also feels this. Generally, the baby is stable, unaffected by this, but the baby begins to gradually move downwards into the position of labor. She's forced, or the baby is forced to do this. And I need you to know that prophetically, for centuries, human beings have been experiencing wars and famines and disasters and social unrest. These were contractions. They were relatively far apart and localized, and life continued. The world continued to develop even with these disruptions. But when you move to phase 2, which is the active labor, now labor becomes unmistakable. What happens here? The cervix is opened more rapidly, and the contractions are becoming more stronger and longer and intense and more frequent. Typically at this phase, the contractions are coming between 3 and 5 minutes, and they are lasting almost the same period, 45 to 60 seconds, which is a minute. The mother can no longer ignore what is happening. Everything changes. Labor becomes a dominant reality, and it changes everything. The effect on the mother is that she feels the pain intensifying significantly. Her focus now narrows on this pain, and fatigue begins to increase because it's really eating her energies out, and emotionally she becomes vulnerable. And the mother now realizes this is reality. It's happening. And the baby inside continues to descend slowly. And each contraction applies pressure that moves the baby closer to the birth canal. Let me say this to you, my brothers and sisters. At this stage 2, this is where we are today. We are seeing multiple crises that are occurring simultaneously. Wars, refugee crises, economic instability, moral collapse, natural disasters across the world, religious polarization. Humanity is increasingly sensing that something is happening globally. The contractions, the prophetic contractions are becoming more noticeable. You can't miss them. And so we are now moving very rapidly into the transition phase 3. This is usually the most intense phase. And in this phase, the cervix is fully dilated. And contractions are extremely intense. Every close stage, they are coming in. And they are very difficult to endure for the mother because they're coming in very short spaces of 2 minutes to 3 minutes. And they are lasting longer now, 60 to 90 seconds. This is very little recovery time that the mother has between contractions. It's back to back. This is often the hardest stage of the labor. And many mothers, when they get to this one, I'm sure they can comment below and let us know that this is where exhaustion begins to kick in. They are overwhelmed. Fear takes over. Emotional distress comes in. If you are very close, they might kick you and scream at you and hold you and tear you apart. And you often hear them saying, I cannot do this anymore. Yet from a medical point of view, that statement often indicates that we are very close to delivery. So the baby experiences tremendous pressure. The head begins to be pushed through the birth canal. The baby is being prepared for life outside the womb. When the crown of the head is revealed, this is where the doctors tell the mother to push. So as Adventist expositors and teachers in the Christian space, we see this as analogous of the final crisis before Jesus returns. The world experiences escalating turmoil. Political systems are shaking and they are failing. Religious tensions are on the increase, and persecution of believers particularly is emerging. And events are occurring together with greater intensity. It's like a flood that's pushed towards the world at the same time. Then finally, then comes the moment everything has been moving toward. What happens here? A baby is delivered, is born. The pain suddenly achieves its purpose. The suffering is understood in the light of the outcome. The pain that dominates the experience is replaced with joy as the cry is heard in the labor room and the mother smiles. But the exhaustion remains. But the focus shifts from the suffering and the pain of the exhaustion to the child. The baby enters the completely new world. It's a new phase of existence that begins for the baby as well as the mother. Prophetically, this is so clear that the second coming of Jesus, that's the culmination of the labor pains, the arrival of the king. What seems like chaos was actually a preparation for his coming. What seemed like a destruction was actually a transition to the birth of a new kingdom. So why these birth pains become more frequent? One of the most important medical realities is this. As delivery approaches, the contractions become more frequent. As I explained, they also become more intense, and they are also widespread across the whole body. You're feeling it. And it's unavoidable. And the intervals between them become shorter and shorter. This is exactly why Jesus chose this metaphor to explain and teach the history or the events that will happen as we approach his return. The crises will increase. Global instability will increase. Human suffering will multiply. The world will become increasingly aware that something is wrong and something is about to happen. Not because God has abandoned the world. No. He is standing as the obstetrician, the gynecologist, because the world is approaching the moment of delivery. God stands there to deliver that child and make sure it's born into the world. And so the most prophetic insight I would like to share with you, and perhaps the greatest insight from this childbirth experience, is that labor pains are not evidence that the child is dying. No. They are evidence that the child is actually coming. And so likewise, when we see wars, they are not proof that Jesus has forgotten this world. No. Famines are not proof that God has lost control. The suffering we see because of earthquakes does not prove that history is meaningless. They are signs that history is moving towards its appointed climax, which is the second coming of Jesus with the clouds, the angels of heaven. This is why Jesus said, all these are but the beginning of birth pains. The pain is real. The suffering is real. But for the believer, the pain points towards and beyond just the pain. It points to the birth of the new world which is ushered in by the coming of Jesus Christ. And so I want to give us this closing remark on the warning that goes beyond Matthew 24 verse 8. Because many people stop at verse 8. But Jesus did not. So immediately after describing the birth pains, he says, they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. That's Matthew 24, verse 9. So the sequence is important here. Birth pains happen. Social instability follows. Then there are ethnic tensions. Then there are wars, economic pressures. Then increasing hostility toward God's faithful people. So as a Seventh-day Adventist believer, I understand that these developments are not the final crisis themselves. They are preparing the world for the crisis that will come. And that the final conflict will not ultimately be about immigration or xenophobia. They will ultimately be, they will not even be about the race where you come from, whether you're white or black. It will not ultimately be about your economics. It will not ultimately be about your politics. These issues are actually vehicles through which fear, prejudice, division are steered. The real issue, brothers and sisters, will be worship. It will be your conscience. It will be who you are loyal to. It will be about obedience to God. Listen to what Ellen White wrote in the book, The Great Controversy, on page 608. Please listen to this one. Take a screenshot of this. She says, as the storm approaches, a large class who have professed faith in the third angel's message abandon their position and join ranks of the opposition. Let this sink in as we close with this appeal. You see, for me, prophecy is not about creating fear, but it is about preparing a people for what's coming. Jesus did not give us these signs so we could become anxious and fearful and panic and go into paranoia. He gave them so we would become ready. The birth pains are here. The signs are developing before our eyes. The question is not whether prophecy is being fulfilled or not. The question is whether we are ready to meet the one who is coming. Because he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Watch therefore, he says, for you know not the hour that your Lord cometh. That's Matthew 24, verse 42. Watch, because you do not know when he cometh. But be careful how you go through these birth pains. Hold on to him. Never give up. God will see you through. Those who live in this day, the just shall live by faith. And may God bless you, because the birth pains are here.